Sleeping Beauty, read by Grandpa.
Welcome, kids,
It's story time.
with Grandpa and Nana.
Let's read.
This is the story that Makenna requested. It is Sleeping Beauty. It was up to Aiden. He would call it Sleeping Booty, but it's Sleeping Beauty. Here we go. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen. When the king gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, the king and the queen were filled with joy and decided to hold a christening feast to celebrate. They invited their friends and all the kings, the queens, the princesses, and the princes from the other kingdoms all over the land. 5 good fairies lived in the kingdom, and the king wanted them to be the godmothers of his daughter. One of these fairies was very old, and no one had seen her in years or even knew where she was. So that when the king sent out the invitations to his daughters, he invited only the 4 young fairies. The day the christening arrived, it was a joyous occasion, and the palace was full of laughter and dancing. After the delicious feast, the 4 good fairies gave the princess their magical gifts. Bending over the crib, the first fairy waved her wand and said, "You shall be kind and considerate." The second fairy said, "You shall be beautiful and loving." The third fairy said, "You shall be clever and thoughtful." The baby was promised everything in the world that was good to wish for, but just as the third fairy finished giving her gift, there was a loud bang, and the palace doors flew open. No. It was the old fairy. She was furious because she had not been invited to the feast. She rushed over to the sleeping baby and waved her wand, casting a curse on the child. "One day the king's daughter shall prick her finger on a spindle, and she'll fall asleep for 100 years, she screeched, and then she left. The guests fell silent at these terrible words, and the queen burst into tears. She was so sad. The 4th fairy had not given her gift. "Dear queen," she said, "please don't cry, don't weep. I cannot undo the curse, but I can soften it," she said, and she walked over to the crib and she waved her wand. "The princess will prick her finger on a spindle, but she will not die. Instead, the princess and everyone within the palace and the grounds will fall asleep, and it will last for 100 years." The king thanked the fairy with his first kindness, and then to protect his daughter, he ordered that every spindle in the whole kingdom be thrown out and burned. The years passed, and the princess grew into a beautiful and kind young woman, just as the fairies had promised. One day, to amuse herself, the princess decided to explore the rooms in the palace that she had never been in before. After a while, she came to a little door at the top of the tall tower. Inside it was an old woman working on a spinning wheel. Oh no. The princess didn't know that the woman was really the old fairy in disguise. Uh-oh. "What are you doing?" the princess asked curiously. "I'm spinning thread, dear child," said the woman. "Can I try?" said the princess. No sooner had she touched the spindle, and she pricked her finger and fell into a deep, deep sleep. A strange quietness came over the whole palace. From the grounds to the tallest tower, the king and the queen all began to yawn. Before long, every living thing within the castle walls had fallen into a deep, deep sleep. Kind of like how Aiden sleeps sometimes. Well, as time passed, A hedge of thorns sprung around the palace. It grew higher and higher and thicker every year until only the very tallest towers could even be seen. The story of the beautiful princess that lay sleeping within the walls spread throughout the land. She became known as Sleeping Beauty. Many princes tried to break through the thorns and to rescue Sleeping Beauty, but none of them were successful. The thorn hedge was just too thick. Exactly 100 years after the princess had fallen asleep, a handsome prince who had heard the story of Sleeping Beauty decided to try to break the curse and wake the sleeping princess. The prince didn't know that the fairy's spell was coming to its end. As he pushed on the thick hedge, every thorn turned into a beautiful rose, and the path magically formed to let him pass. Soon the prince came to the palace. Not a sound could be heard. Anywhere, he saw people and animals all sleeping in every single room. At last, he found the tiny room at the top of the tower where Sleeping Beauty lay. The prince looked at her in wonder and then kissed her ever so gently. The sleeping princess opened her eyes and smiled at the prince. With that look, they fell in love. All around the palace, other people were waking up. The king and the queen stirred from their deep sleep and were overjoyed to see their daughter awake. They welcomed the handsome prince who had found their princess. The palace was once again full of laughter and joy. The king called for a huge wedding feast to be prepared, and he invited everybody in the kingdom. Sleeping Beauty married her handsome prince, and they lived happily ever after. The end.